executive. We at MPC with George Ranney, and George Ranney was on the board here at the university. He was a lawyer at Mayer Brown and Platt, and he was a board member at MPC, as well as the MacArthur Foundation. And George and I worked, when I was at MPC, on the CHA effort. We put together a plan when Gene Sawyer became mayor.
And that was after the death of Harold Washington, and City Council agreed.
That was after the death of Harold Washington and council wars.
Right.
And Gene was the compromise mayor for the divided city council. And working with George Ranney and MPC, George primarily, and Mary Decker, thought, because George worked for Dick Ogilvy when he was governor of Illinois, and he was a successful governor. And so George convinced Dick Ogilvy to become chairman of the CHA. And we said, oh my God, he agreed to do it. This may be the beginning of a new day for the Housing Authority. We were all elated. However, the elation was kind of cut short. I remember when I was doing something in New York, and when I got to my hotel, the MPC, Mary Decker or George, called me and said, oh, Vince, God, bad news. Dick Ogilvy had a heart attack and passed away before he ever sat in the chair as chairman of CHA. Wow, everything is thrown up in the air. Long and short of it, they pressed me to become chairman of CHA.
What was your reaction to that?
Did not want to do it. Had not ever had a public job, an elected job in a public agency. I said, no way. But after I thought about it, I said, at least, given that I grew up across the street from Wentworth Gardens, given that the church that I went to was moved across the street where I was living at 37th and Wentworth because they were building the Dan Ryan, given that Robert Taylor was under construction while I was growing up, I said, and conditions were so bad, I said, at least I think I know a few things. Maybe I can help. And since 95% of the people living in public housing at the time were African American, how could I turn my back on that? So I did it, but with a caveat. With Mayor Sawyer and HUD and the city council, I said, I will only assume the position if for some temporary period of time, I'm both chairman and the managing director. They agreed to allow me to operate in both positions. And of course, I hit the ground running. And less than 2 weeks that I was there was a serious situation. A small child was injured in Rockwell Gardens. Someone threw a firebomb in their apartment. She was injured. And Nancy Jefferson, who was a community organizer in the West Side in those days, she called and says, Vince, you got to do something. Well, what can I do? I'm not a policeman. I'm not a fireman. I don't have the funds. And, we rely on the Chicago Police Department and the fire department to handle these things. And so I went there and talked to the family, looked around Rockwell Gardens, saw the condition of people, unemployment, elevators not working, just, a nightmare. I said, I'm going to make this the first step of hopefully a change at CHA. And so we put a lot of effort into Rockwell Gardens and enhanced and created a residence council, put programs in, and we knew we had to get crime under control.
So is this what led to the creation of the CHA Police Department? That was something that had never been done before, correct?
That directly led to the creation of CHA Police. As a result of Rockwell, all of the buildings, none of the buildings other than on the north side had lobbies. The family buildings did not have lobbies. The senior buildings did, but not the family buildings. And so they were wide open. And at Rockwell, we used the craftsmen at CHA, and we created lobbies. And we created curfews.
Did those apply to children and adults, or simply children?
It applied to everyone. And I spent a lot of time while I was at CHA in front of the federal judge, because the ACLU had me in front of them on a regular basis.
Right, yeah, we have a question about that. Well, first I wanted to ask just about the creation of the CHA Police Department and why did you think it was necessary to have a police force that was separate from the Chicago Police Department?
Well, actually, I developed a good relationship with Leroy Martin. He was superintendent of police at the time. Things went so well at a couple of the buildings in Rockwell. We experienced other similar problems at other high-rise buildings. And so I said, that seemed to have worked. Why don't we go to 2822 Calumet? And it was a building that, of course, was a nightmare. I called Leroy and I said, Leroy, you got to help. You got to help. CPD is not really doing the job that we need to create a safe environment for residents. Can't do anything about changing any of the social dynamics when people are jumping in their bathtubs to escape gunfire. We did the building in Rockwell, and it worked pretty good. Crime was down there. People are feeling safe. Got a resident council. 2822 is a nightmare, another nightmare. Can you work with me? And I said, attack the problem at 2822. And Leroy said, yeah, Vince, whatever I can do. I said, well, I want you with 5 hours notice to assemble a squadron of your officers. I'll assemble my staff, and we will go to 2822 without notifying anyone, and we will surround the building. Your officers will go up, starting at the top of the building, and go down each floor together with my management personnel, because we're going to carry out an emergency inspection of each unit.
But that's not what the ACLU called it. I mean, they referred to it as a raid, correct? And this is why you mentioned going to federal court.
That's correct. We carried out our emergency inspection. I never changed that nomenclature. And when we got to the building, of course, the gangbangers, drug dealers, whatever you want to call them, they had lookouts, and they knew that all of a sudden all of these squad cars and CHA people showed up at the building. And before we could get out of the cars, guns and drugs were raining out of the windows. We went through the building. We created lobbies at that building, set up curfews, and sign in, sign out. And it was, for the residents, another success. At least they could go back and forth, and they didn't have to duck and dodge bullets and drug dealers. So working with Jack Kemp and Gertrude Jordan, that method of securing the high-rise buildings was called Operation Clean Sweep.
So this operation obviously had some very successful results, but it certainly had some methodologies that were called into question by multiple organizations. So you're one of the only politicians I've ever heard of who was attacked by both the ACLU. I mean, you're not a politician. You're one of the only public servants I've ever heard of who's attacked by both the ACLU and the NRA for related issues to these tactics of sweeping the buildings.
And getting rid of firearms.
Getting rid of drugs. Like I said, a lot of successful results. But what justified the methods to you? Were these methods something that folks on resident councils were supportive of?
Well, we didn't have a lot of tenant patrols at the time. When I left CHA, we had 22 developments with tenant patrols. As far as I was concerned, my most important thing that I could accomplish was working with the residents, creating opportunities for the residents, trying to improve their living conditions, and to get the patronage workers off the payroll of CHA to improve maintenance and security at the development. That worked because I think I grew up around public housing. If not in it, I grew up around it, and I wasn't afraid to embrace the residents' desires to have a better life.
You are listening to Chicagoland. We're going to take a quick break from our interview with Vince Lane. Don't go away.
As China's role grows greater on the global stage, you want to stay up to date on the issues most pressing to China both domestically and internationally. Check out the Just China podcast for in-depth analysis on recent headlines and investigative reports on Chinese matters that affect our globalized world. We are Just China. Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening.
So these policies that you implemented were attempting to target the many issues plaguing housing developments in Chicago at that time, such as crime, concentrated poverty, unemployment. Yet these high-rise housing developments, such as Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor homes, became almost like a national symbol of urban blight. As you were working to improve the lives of the people who lived there, was there a point at which you realized that these issues could not be addressed due to the structure of these developments? Did this lead you to begin advocating for a different form of public housing development, such as mixed income housing dispersed throughout the city?
Well, you could only go so far. HUD had backlog of, at that time, maybe $50 billion in needed repairs throughout the country, and limited funding to upgrade the buildings themselves. When I set up the CHA police, got the funding from HUD, got then Governor Jim Thompson and the legislature to approve us as a police department, things again went a giant leap of improved security. Those police officers had one job: to protect the residents of public housing. Unlike CPD, and I'm just not being critical of CPD, but if you had a choice of working O'Hare and Robert Taylor, where would you prefer to go?
So you felt the CHA needed its own law enforcement body because the Chicago police officers were sometimes reticent to provide protection to residents.
I remember one morning about 2 o'clock. I often drove through the developments at odd hours, and we were at Ida B. Wells. And as we were driving up, I heard this music blaring from the upper floor of a high-rise. And I said, let's go over to that building. And so we drove over to the building, and I saw a squad car parked in front of the building, and a black officer and a white officer lounging on the hood of the car.
At 2 a.m.
at 2 a.m. with the music.